So tonight's topic is we're on our second webinar on women's issues. And we'll introduce our teacher for the evening in a moment. But I thought I would start out with reading a couple short quotes. Of course, when we're talking about women's issues, we're often referring to patriarchy and the ways that patriarchy affects us all, not just women, but all of us. And one of my favorite writers on this topic is Bell Hooks. And I'm just going to read a short quote from her, and then I'm going to read something that she and Thich Nhat Hanh said to each other during an interview some years ago. And I think this first writing is from 2010, and it's an article on understanding patriarchy. And I'm not sure if it's out of her book or if it's a separate article. I don't know that. But so she says, citizens in this nation fear challenging patriarchy even as they lack overt awareness that they are fearful. So deeply embedded in our collective unconscious are the rules of patriarchy. I often tell audiences that if we were to go door to door asking if we should end male violence against women, most people would give their unequivocal support. Then if you told them that we can only stop male violence against women by ending male domination, by eradicating patriarchy, they would begin to hesitate, to change their position. Despite the many gains of contemporary feminist movement, greater equality for women in the workforce, more tolerance for the relinquishing of rigid gender roles, patriarchy as a system remains intact, and many people continue to believe that it is needed if humans are to survive as a species. This belief seems ironic, given that patriarchal methods of organizing nations, especially the insistence on violence as a means of social control, has actually led to the slaughter of millions of people on the planet. So that's from her writing. And then I want to read just this little section of the conversation between Bell Hooks and Thich Nhat Hanh. And this was some years ago, and Bell Hooks said they were talking about inequality and love. And she said to Thich Nhat Hanh, "Before I came here, I had been struggling with the question of anger toward my ex-boyfriend. I have taken my vows as a bodhisattva, and so I always feel very depressed when I have anger. I had come to a point of despair because I had so much difficulty with my anger in relation to this man. So yesterday's Dharma Talk about embracing our anger and using it and letting it go was very essential for me at this moment." And Thich Nhat Hanh says, "You want to be human. Be angry, it's okay. But not to practice is not okay. To be angry, that is very human. And to learn how to smile at your anger and make peace with your anger is very nice. That is the whole thing, the meaning of the practice, of the learning. By taking a look at your anger, it can be transformed into the kind of energy that you need, understanding and compassion. It is with negative energy that you can make the positive energy. A flower, although beautiful, will become compost someday. But if you know how to transform the compost back into the flower, then you don't have to worry. You don't have to worry about your anger because you know how to handle it, to embrace, to recognize, and to transform it. So this is what is possible." So I just wanted to start with that to set sort of the stage and also just to give us something to think about. And then I'm going to invite Adriana, if she wouldn't mind, to introduce our speaker for the evening.
No, we are so thrilled to have with us tonight Sunii Chandy. And Sunii is the legal director of the National Women's Law Center and works with all of the center's teams in their work to address and present sex discrimination in many contexts. We will learn more from Sunii about her work at NWLC, which takes on issues ranging from the right to full reproductive health care to protecting students from sexual harassment. Sunii also served on the board of the Transgender Law Center and Split This Rock. a poetry and social justice organization. She has performed her poetry and led creative writing workshops in a variety of settings for the past 25 years. She's a powerful advocate for women's empowerment, and we are thrilled to have her, and I will open the floor to Sunu. Thanking you, Sunu, and eager to hear what you have to share with us. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much to Annie and Adriana for inviting me to share some of my story and experiences with this group. As I told them, I have a little cold, so that's why I'm not on the video, and I hope that you can hear me. And we'll have time for a lot of questions and answers and discussions as we go. When I thought about what the group does and what you all are focused on, I broke the topic down into sort of 3 areas. One is about the legal work, one is my connection to various forms of meditation, and the third is the piece about poetry. And I love what Annie shared about the compost and the flowers and the anger and how it's all part of this process, and it can be very difficult and painful to get to the other side, and how important it is to go through that. And now we are sort of, as an organization, the National Women's Law Center, it's been around for over 40 years. It's located in DuPont Circle, and we do work across the country alongside state and local advocates for policy changes, on litigation, and culture change. So my role is a new one that was created there about 2 years ago, and a little more, longer than that. And I work on the litigation-focused matters. So I'm going to just go through just an overview, and then I can talk in more detail about any areas of interest. So the areas of work that we have are education, workplace justice, health and reproductive rights, and income security. And we also, and I'll talk a little bit about this, 2 years ago were approached about setting up the Time's Up legal defense. Now, we had already started, I'll tell you a little bit of the story of how that came to be from that perspective. We had started something called the Legal Network for Gender Equity. I don't know if you're able to put that first slide up, or maybe even you can put the first one up. It shows the family picture and a little bit of details, but okay, great, thank you. So we had to do just an introduction to our staff, and the main things I wanted to share on this slide are, that's my family. I'm on the right. That's our daughter, Satya, who's 10, and my spouse, Erica Simmons, and her grandmother, who's 94, who lives with us. Erica's mom died about 12 years ago before I met her, so that's the family. And having an adopted daughter, a same-sex partner, and being a caregiver to a very senior person, you can imagine that all of the work I do is very personal to me. It's not hypothetical, the needs for all of the things that we fight for. I also have my quote on here, just keep going, which comes from, I think, Buddhist poetry. If everything's going well, don't worry, it'll change. And if everything's going horribly, it'll also change. And so just to keep going with the work. Oh, thank you. There you go. So in terms of just an overview of what I do, all of the teams that I mentioned are engaged in bringing cases. So the education team, we have cases against school districts when individuals bring complaints of sexual assault or dating violence that the schools don't respond to or address well. We bring Title IX cases. And our focus has been on the high school level because there's a lot of attention in the college level, but there's so much happening in the high schools where, you know, in a couple of the cases we have, the young girls were actually suspended for, you know, engaging in sexual conduct or activity when they actually had brought a complaint that they were forced to do X, Y, Z. And so instead of just sort of addressing that and dealing with it, students are punished. And of course that has a racial element to it often as well. Our workplace justice team, we have a big case about pregnancy accommodation. And people being forced to take time off when they actually could do the job with just a little modification, and employers are supposed to work with folks. And we have a big case that will be settling on that point with a big class of women. We also have these lawsuits against the federal government on a variety of areas. One is about the Title IX rules changing when it comes to investigations of sexual assault in campuses. One is about employers giving more leeway to sort of not give birth control as part of their health insurance plans, and this privileging of religious beliefs over other civil rights, even if it creates harm to people. And then I want to come to the Me Too, because we are coming up on the 2-year anniversary. So after the election happened, we started the Legal Network for Gender Equity for 2 reasons. One, we thought that people may be less likely to go to the federal government civil rights agencies for help on all variety of civil rights issues. And second, because there were all these lawyers who said, we want to be part of the resistance, we want to do something, we want to use our skills for good. And so we created this legal network for gender equity that connects people to lawyers for sex discrimination issues. And we can actually go to the second slide, because I'm starting to talk about those pieces. So we had started the legal network for gender equity there. And then when the Me Too sort of went viral 2 years ago, and there was the letter from the farm workers to the Hollywood celebrities saying, we are all going through this together and we're here for you, be here for us, this is so important. And then the funds were raised in relation to that. And we were called to say, are you able to set up a legal defense fund with these monies? And so we were able to partner the Legal Network for Gender Equity with Time's Up Legal Defense Fund. What does that mean? If someone is suffering sex discrimination in a variety of settings, they can fill out a form on our website and be connected with 3 lawyers who are all willing to do a free consult. Beyond that, some may be low, maybe have low fees, some may do it for free. It's up to the particular relationship. However, if the case is a low-wage worker, or if it's about sexual harassment in the workplace or related retaliation, the lawyer can then apply for money to bring the case through the Time's Up Legal Defense Fund. So we have funded hundreds and hundreds of cases. Many people have obtained relief through that, sometimes even upfront, because they see we're going to fight this all the way, and the person has funding to fight it all the way, and so they're more likely to settle cases up front. And also, we also have PR help, and we also can connect people to lawyers and help pay for cases if they are being brought up on defamation case on claims. So if someone brings a case and then someone gets a very wealthy or powerful person says, oh, how dare you bring that claim against me, and then sues them, we can also connect people with lawyers to represent them in those kinds of lawsuits, those retaliation lawsuits. So those are some of the things that started 2 years ago. I also want to lift up LGBTQ equality for 2 reasons. One, that's part of our work as a women's rights organization. And 2, there's really important things happening right now. One is on October 8th at the Supreme Court, there is going to be a very, very big moment for LGBTQ workers' rights. There are 3 cases that are being heard together, a trio of cases. They're called Title VII cases, which is about workplace civil rights. 2 are gay employees and 1 is a transgender employee. 2 of them are represented by ACLU. And we are all working hard. Many of our organizations, I just was on a call, they're going to have 65 speakers at that rally. During the entire oral argument, from I think 8:30 to 12:30, there will be people from different organizations coming and talking about why these cases are crucial. So the names of the cases are Amy Stevens, Harris Funeral Homes, Zarda, and Bostic. But they're sort of known as the Title VII LGBTQ workers cases on October 8th. That's the oral argument. The decision probably won't be, until the spring or late getting into the summer. But what is at issue in these cases? Will this U.S. Supreme Court roll back workplace protections for LGBTQ workers? That's what's at stake. Because there's been decades of civil rights work to say LGBTQ related discrimination is sex discrimination. And why that's so important is because that's how it plays out. It's about not conforming to sex stereotypes, but also because sex discrimination is what is in the federal law. Okay. Now, there are cities and states that very explicitly say sexual orientation, gender identity in the local laws, and that's great to have explicit protections. But the only way that we can have comprehensive protections across the country is if the US Supreme Court says, yes, this is part of sex discrimination. And many, many appeals courts have said that. It has gone up. There's been a really good body of case law and precedent. And even before the LGBTQ issue was taken up, the key case that sort of set the groundwork for this, Price Waterhouse, was about, a straight woman who did not, quote unquote, talk like a woman, act like a woman, wear makeup, have long hair, like all the things that quote unquote, a woman was supposed to do. And that case went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, yes, she's denied a partnership in her accounting firm because of those reasons. That's sex discrimination. That's the law of the land. Once you go there, there is no way to then say, but if you're LGBTQ, you don't get those protections, which is what the court would have to do to roll this back. So obviously with this court, we don't know what will happen, but just that's a case to keep aware of. And if you're in the DC area, come on out to the Supreme Court on October 8th. The other thing I want to say about LGBTQ equality is that there was also a bill that after decades of work, passed in the House of Representatives on May 17th. And it's called the Equality Act. And it has many pieces to it. One is that it clarifies and confirms that sex discrimination includes LGBTQ. So this issue that's sort of coming up at the court, it confirms that in a very clear, explicit way in the law. And it also creates additional civil rights protections for places that get federal funding, saying they can't discriminate based on sex. One example of that is haircuts, dry cleaner. You can name a whole bunch of places that say men charge this, women charge that. Why is that okay? Because this is a gap in the law. There's a gap in the law, on the federal law, when it comes to public accommodations and sex discrimination. So it would basically fix some of these gaps in the law. And that is a snapshot about some of the work that we're doing on the policy and the litigation front. And so, for example, in the LGBTQ worker case, we, the National Women's Law Center, led an amicus brief, which is basically we're not a party to the case, but we have something to say about this case. And we were joined by over 35 women's rights groups to say, this is sex discrimination. We are the experts on sex discrimination. Listen to us and include LGBTQ workers in these protections. So the last thing I have on this slide is the mailing list, where we send out, just not very frequently, but once in a while, just alerts, updates, action steps you can take. And so if you go right to our homepage, nwlc.org, and then on the top right, there's an email sign up. So if you want to get updates on any of the cases we just talked about or what's going on, you can do that. Like, I know they're going to send one out about the October 8th cases, probably a couple days before then, to let people know how to be engaged and how to look that up. If any of you are lawyers yourselves or know people who are, please ask them to check out the Legal Network for Gender Equity. They could sign up to also sort of be a volunteer through that program, and they could also apply for funding. The only requirement for applying for funding with Time's Up Legal Defense Fund is that you join the network, which is free. And so if you are thinking of taking cases with low-wage workers, it just has to be sex harassment in the workplace or related retaliation in the workplace. There is funding for these cases. And so that's also, we'd love to get the word out about that. If you are connected to lawyers groups or know people who are, please get the word out about that. I think now we can actually take questions, because now we would be going to the next stage about sort of more on a personal level and the meditation related piece. So we can take a pause there and take any questions about the legal work.
Perfect. Someone has a question. Perfect, Nicole. Please go ahead.
Well, part of what I wanted to say was also just to comment, because I actually utilized the Healthcare Times Up legal network this summer. And I was given those options of 3 lawyers I could speak to about the situation that I was involved in. And they were honestly a lifeline, the one that I ended up working with. So more than anything, I just wanted to chime in and say thank you for everything that you're doing as someone who has
Oh my goodness.
really appreciated it.
Oh, wow. I would love to, if you don't mind, I would love to share that with the director of the program. Maybe we can connect afterwards, because, you know, you only hear about like you know what I mean? When you run a program, you hear, like, I was like, where's she going? Is she going to say, and then no one called me back?
Well, no, it was difficult.
Yeah.
Like the online forum,
yes,
the forum where you submit your information.
Yeah.
I did have trouble with that, but
Yeah.
once I emailed someone, then like the tech team emailed me back. Anyways, whatever. That's neither here nor there. And I also spoke with, I believe her name is Dr. Ellen Chu. She's your director of the Healthcare Times Up. And honestly, like, I will remember that phone call for the rest of my life. Like, she was so she was so validating and really, like, you know, it's not as though anything like dramatically changed in the situation that I was involved in, but I just felt like I wasn't heard and that I was not insane, which I think for a lot of people, when you're up against a system, that is what I think that's what happened. Now that I've spoken to other women who've gone through other situations, it is kind of crazy making, and it is sort of isolating, because you're like, wait, but this can't be right. Anyways, that's it. I don't want to take up too much time, but I just wanted to chime in to say thank you. That's all.
Oh my goodness, absolutely. And I also will make one clarification, just because it can be very, I think, confusing for the outsiders. I'm so happy to hear that you had a positive and helpful experience. So the Time's Up Legal Defense Fund is through the National Women's Law Center, where we connect people with lawyers. And there's also all these other pieces of Time's Up, and the healthcare may be connected with one of those. But if you're connecting with lawyers about sex discrimination, that's probably through us. So you may have actually talked to people with us, and then also with the bigger Time's Up, which is not in our office, but we're like a sister. We have a sister.
Okay, yeah.
But
anyway, I think I got passed around, so I'm sure that what you're saying is right. But in any case, it was helpful, so that's like what matters.
I'm so glad to hear that. I'm very glad to hear that. Thank you for telling me that. Appreciate it. So if there's anything that folks want to ask about any of our areas of work, anything about the organization, anything about Time's Up or the legal network, feel free to do that now. And if not, I will just go on to
yes, Annie has a question, please.
I have a question. I really am intrigued by what you were just sharing about the LGBTQ case. And I'm wondering if you could expand just a little bit. I think it would be interesting for us to hear exactly the way that the rights of women are tied in with LGBTQ in a legal sense. I think that could be super helpful.
Yes, I would love to do that. One is, I mentioned the case about the woman and her gender presentation. That case is called Price Waterhouse, but I'm going to focus on the amicus brief that we wrote, because we actually went back before the 1980s in the Price Waterhouse case and actually cited to the dictionary about the definition of sex at the time the civil rights laws were passed. So when these laws were passed about sex discrimination, it was not just about biological sex. It was about the societal roles and expectations. So when the case law developed for sex discrimination, assumptions and expectations about gender roles was always part of what was going to be protected. So if you say, women with children under X age need not apply for this job, right? That's not about biology. It's not about all women. It's about roles and expectations. And there's a whole body of case law that says the protections against sex discrimination in the law include these roles and expectations. That theory then went into the Price Waterhouse case, which is the case I mentioned, about you are too macho, you curse, you don't wear makeup, you have short hair, you're not dressing this way. That's why you're not getting promoted, right? That, if that's sex discrimination, right? How can you make a legal distinction that someone who quote unquote looks like that and has a female partner is not going to be getting the same protections, right? And so the discrimination against LGBTQ individuals can very much be framed as you are not living up to gender expectations, right? Either because you're transgender and you're not aligning with the sex assigned at birth, or because you are having a spouse of the same sex and not an opposite sex, which is what is required of you. And so you can sort of tease out the many, many different arguments. And finally, these circuit courts, appeals courts, before it gets to the Supreme Court, have written so many good decisions about there is no logical or principled way to carve out LGBTQ people from workplace protections based on sex. And that's really what the Supreme Court would have to do. Now, the argument on the other side is, here's the law, it says sex, it doesn't say sexual orientation, it doesn't say gender identity. If you want that, you need to go to Congress and get that, which there are efforts to do that too, and we need to pressure the Senate to do that. But there really isn't a practical way on the ground. How would you train your HR? Would you say, okay, if this person's gay and their like hair is like this, you can discriminate against them. But if this person, you know, is straight and they're not wearing the dress that you want, you can't discriminate, because, you know, it just doesn't make any practical sense. It doesn't make any sense on the ground. It doesn't make any sense legally. And it's just not right. So those are some of the ties that we're making. In a nutshell, it's about gender expectations. And our sort of greater goal for liberation is for us all to have the freedom to be ourselves. And to have that look in terms of dress, act, speech, however that feels right to us. And so we have done amicus briefs on, you know, the bathroom cases. Sometimes there are good schools who are sort of saying, you know, the kids can use the bathrooms aligned with their gender identity, and then some other parents will sue them. So it's not always like the school is the one who's actually, you know, not being helpful. Sometimes the school's being really great. And then you have a set of parents who are saying, this is, you know, a problem. And so we have done a lot of briefs to the court in support of transgender students, all along the same theory, which is to not allow that would be sex discrimination.
Yeah, that makes so much sense to me, because I feel like all of those kind of things like are part of the of patriarchal, those expectations that you will look like this, you will like men, you know, like all of that. I think it makes total sense to me. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, so that's really exciting. And right before the Emmy Awards, Laverne Cox was talking about it on the red carpet with one of the ACLU lawyers. And that was really exciting to sort of get the word out about the October 8th case to a broad audience. So I'm so happy to share that with you all too.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. I have another, can you go more, Sunu, deep in what is happening in high school? I mean, I have two daughters, and it's kind of two daughters that are Latinas here, so we have our own issues, but also they sometimes they feel empowered, but at the same time they don't feel like they have enough tools to defend themselves. Is that at this point we have girls with these two sentiments? They are empowered, but they don't have the tools. They don't know how to defend themselves. So what can you tell us about?
Sure. So the education team has done a really good job. And if people are on our website, National Women's Law Center, NWLC.org, you can look up the education team. There are some wonderful toolkits. I'm going to name three things in particular. There's one, a sex harassment toolkit, which is for how to address issues of sex harassment that come up into the schools. You know, sort of look for the Title IX person, the people you should go to, the things you should do, written in a very understandable language. There's also 2 reports about Dress Coded, which is about how dress codes are used against girls in schools and, you know, disparately, you know, against girls of color often, or curvy girls. And then people are suspended, like taken out of class about, again, the same theme with these control, and like boys can't control themselves. And so you have to wear this sweater, or, you know, there's a lot of dress coded issues. And so there was a participatory research project where young women in Washington, D.C. area helped with that. And now they're doing policy work related to that to try to get schools to change their policies. And the third thing I want to mention, which is specific to Latina women, is one of our legal fellows did a participatory research project in Philadelphia with Latina girls and mental health resources. And it's a wonderful report, and I can look up the name of it so I can make sure to tell you. But it's basically talking about what kind of support they need for mental health, and either with social workers, with groups, like not having their complaints being taken seriously, who's believed, who is assumed to be sexual or not, is very much tied in with race in lots of different ways. And so how are those complaints received? And so we try to have resources for the high school students themselves and their parents to advocate for themselves, for the support and the resources they need. So those are a few examples of, you know, beyond the law and policy, just on the ground, how we can try to give resources to make things better.
No, perfect. Thank you so much for doing that work. Yes, my daughters have this the dress discrimination. They have it so clear because they look different. So thank you so much for these tools and for
absolutely. And I can definitely send links afterwards for any of the things I've mentioned. But if you go to the education section of our website, they're probably pretty easy to find because they just did a dress coded too. So that's probably highlighting the next steps of that work.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Someone has some other question for Sunii? No questions for this section? Okay. So I think we can continue however you want, Sunii, now.
Sure. So I'm happy to share a little bit about how I got connected with Annie at the family week, at the meditation in Pine Bush, and also just going back a step because I actually came to social justice work through the Quaker faith. My parents are immigrants from India. They're from Kerala, which is on the southern tip and is actually 25% Christian. So both of their families are Christian, going back to the grandparents. And so my dad came for seminary. And fortunately for me, it was a Quaker place. And so I grew up in a very progressive social justice community. And it was through that I began sort of going to rallies, getting involved in progressive causes. And it was very much through a faith-based setting. And I like to say that because especially for the LGBTQ piece and for a lot of our work, sort of religion is seen as sort of the ones we are fighting. And that is true on a lot of our reproductive work. But there are also so many progressive faith communities that I like to lift up. And I'm currently a part of All Souls, which is a Unitarian church here in Washington, D.C. I like to share my story about getting connected to meditation. It was in a philosophy class where our teacher had us reading so many wonderful books, and one of them was Being Peace by Thich Nhat Hanh. And I may have told Annie this story over the summer, but we had to live by those principles for 24 hours and write a paper about it. And I kept putting it off because I thought that's really going to be hard. And then finally, over the weekend, I did it. And I had this friend from college who we were barely acquaintances. I would just go and borrow all his CDs. And I was trying to take his CDs and run away like I normally did. And then I thought, okay, I'm living in the moment. I'm being in the moment. I think he wants to sit and chit chat. So we talked all night and we're still best friends to this day. And if that's all I got from being peace and Thich Nhat Hanh and meditation, that would have been enough. But that was sort of my entry point to see the beauty and possibility of being in the moment and of just not rushing around our lives. And that is something I've just held on to. And so when I lived in New York, I went to insight meditation communities there. My partner and I, we actually had our wedding at the insight meditation space on 27th Street in Manhattan. Really beautiful space. And now that I'm in DC, I've been attending Los Sarmientos. There's an LGBTQ and a POC sits whenever I can. And sometimes I get out to Tara Brock's session. I've been out there as well. So I really find meditation to be so central, especially in this political moment, to keeping some sense of calm in all of this work. And I really appreciated going to Blue Cliff for the family week. You know, as I was mentioning to them that we have a 10-year-old daughter, and you know, even now she says, "Let's begin anew." When we're getting all riled up, which happens, you know, more and more now, given her age, and it's very age appropriate. But we have to begin anew a lot. And I really appreciate that she was able to go through that experience with me. And that was our second time there. We went 2 years ago. And just having that as a touch point, that you can always come back to that and start over and refresh. And so that's just a little bit of background about how I come to meditation, my connection with it, and some of my history with it. And I'm happy to talk about any of that as well.
Someone has some comment for Sunu? I would like to ask Sunu, do you connect when you are working in law, when you are having really tough cases that you need to be working? How do you use meditation? At that moment, do you use the tool of meditation, the mindfulness? How do you connect mindfulness with your work?
Mm-hmm. You know, there's actually an organization that some of my friends who are law professors are part of, that is about sort of meditation and law. And I did go to their conference, and one of my friends was speaking at it, and she talked about, as an example, when she does her employment law class, first day, everyone writes about their experience with employment and sort of comes from a place of reality and not a place of reading a textbook. And before you read cases about employment law, we need to know who's in the room and what we're bringing to this. And that's like a way of bringing mindfulness to law school, which is a tough thing to do, because a lot of people there just to get in, get out, take the test, move on. Mm-hmm. But to actually be present with her students, and I learned so much from her and the other panelists that day. So I think there are these formal efforts happening. Mm-hmm. I think for me, it is in litigation, there's a lot of people who are representing their clients and being polite and courteous when they do that. And there's a lot of people who take another approach. Mm-hmm. And, you know, just are nasty. And I think it's a field where it's very easy to be really nasty in the name of zealous advocacy. Mm-hmm. And I think that, you know, on a day-to-day basis, I try to not do that. And I try to have integrity. And it's even funny, even when we submit papers to the court, I'm usually the one taking out the snarky piece, mm-hmm. which sometimes you have to write it in a snarky way first, so then you can edit the snark out. But it's just sort of ironic with some of our partners. I'm like, hey, because courts don't like that. Judges don't like that. They don't like to see that in writing about mm-hmm. the other side. You can make your legal point without that. So I think, as with any other career or field, on a day-to-day basis, we can all make decisions about how we comport ourselves. And I think that is really the benefit of taking this moment for meditation. And, sometimes it's when I do get to go to the gym in the morning, sometimes on the way back, it's like, I'm like, no headphones, nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Which to do that for 20 minutes is really strange and hard, but it's so important, right? And I know you all know that because you're on this call and you have this background, but it's so important to just unplug. And sometimes, like on the way there, I'm listening, and I wanna suggest this. There's a podcast called The Slowdown. Not to get into the poetry piece already, but Tracy K. Smith, who was the poet laureate right before Joy Harjo, who just became first Native American poet laureate for the country. Tracy K. Smith does a daily podcast called The Slowdown, and it's just 5 minutes, and she shares a little insight and reads a poem. So that is a really powerful just practice that I've been trying to listen to that in the morning. And then also many meditation talks, as I'm sure you all do. But to actually try to do nothing, even for 20 minutes, it's so important and so helpful for just clearing, just for a little clearing. And I think these are the kinds of practices I try to incorporate, because then when I go to the office, there's a better chance that I can bring my best self to it, right? Just like with any other field. So, yeah.
Oh, no, perfect.
So appreciative of these tools.
Perfect. Thank you. And any other question? Yeah, Daisy.
Do you hear me? Do you hear me?
Yes.
Magda. Do you hear me?
Yes,
Oh.
Magda, please go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Daisy, and then we will go with Daisy. Sorry.
Oh, okay. So I just wanted to let you know that I've been a member of the Unitarian Universalist Church. Actually, the Cedar Lane one.
Nice.
There?
I think I've been there for a meditation, maybe.
Oh, okay. So I've been going to that congregation for the last 19 years or 20 years. And we have a group for women there called Women. So we do like spiritual readings for the, for related to women issues and so forth. So it's really nice. And I was wondering, have you read a book called The Conscious Parent by an Indian psychologist or psychiatrist whose name is Dr. Sabari?
No, I would be interested in that.
It is a fantastic book about raising, like you're talking about raising your 10-year-old.
Yeah.
So how to raise children in a way that they feel really truly respected for who they are.
Right.
It's a fantastic book.
Oh,
So
thank you. The Conscious Parent?
The Conscious Parent, yes. Okay. Dr. Sabari with T.
Okay.
T. Sabari.
Okay.
Yes. I still read it even though my children are quite old by now. But
oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sunu, this is Daisy. I appreciate how you've given us the lawyer angle and the legal activities, and also brought it into the personal, how we are as human being to human being, whether it's writing a brief or walking after gym class. And I'm curious if you have any recommendations or thoughts about how we are as practitioners in our meditation community. And when we are able to see that something may be rooted in patriarchy, where if a man asks for that, a woman typically is nice and will respond, like a hug. Or I remember being at a retreat once, and this guy walked in and he just hugged me, and I really felt invaded in a certain way, but I didn't know how to respond. So if you have any ideas about that, I would appreciate it.
Oh my goodness, absolutely. And this just goes back to consent and culture change, which is such a big part of what we need to keep highlighting 2 years after the Me Too going viral in all of our sectors. And, it could be that I'll give an example of some of the labor unions are dealing with this, like sort of what some people think is progressive spaces are still needing to be very explicit about providing resources, contact people for this kind of thing. So one change that I know that some of them have instituted is before a conference or a big convening or a retreat or a gathering, there is some information about how people should comport themselves, and 2 or 3 people who will be on call, who will give out their cell phone numbers to say, if anyone feels sort of violated in any way and wants to talk about it, we have resources, support, and avenues for that. Because, and that's what it made me think of, like conferences or academic events, or in many of our fields, they have these sorts of spaces where people from all different backgrounds are coming together. So who's in charge, who's responsible, who do you go to? So I think that could be sort of an important culture change for any of these gatherings, to both have a process, have a point person, and list out expectations. Even in, what I've appreciated in these yoga classes that I go to is now they say, if you are not interested in hands-on assist, they have you sit and close your eyes or whatever. And then they say, if you're not interested in hands-on assist for any reason, please just put your hand on your heart. And sort of normalizing the asking of consent in all of these spaces is something that I think is still very much in the works, but I've seen some progress in the last 2 years. And I think it's also, it's hard. I find myself, it's hard sometimes to say to someone, actually, I'm not comfortable with that. Please don't do that. And I also think when we can do that, and we also have to do the cross benefit, just like in every workplace, do we say something and make it awkward and make it rude and make it this and get retaliated against? Because that's the other option, right? Or do I just say like, ew, and just like take it in? And neither option is good, right? And I think in some of our work on sex harassment is like, we have to name. To make a complaint is hard, to not make a complaint is hard. Like both of these are hard paths, and it might just depend on the situation when we take it up and when we don't. But in terms of the systemic changes that we can push for are in the planning, in the setting the norms, setting the expectations, providing support and resources up front, making a culture where do not presume that the person next to you is going to want this, that, or the other, unless you ask. And, my daughter has taken it all the way there. So like, I'll tousle her hair. She said, you didn't ask consent. And it's like, I'd rather have her say that and to know that that's her body and she has a right to that. And, we have to teach each other this and reteach each other this. And for me, I need to get over making the other person feel uncomfortable. Like, I know that's what I have to do in addition to systemic change in that interpersonal, really, interaction. And that's going to be a judgment call with every interaction. So I'm sorry about that experience you had. I know many of us have probably had similar experiences where you just sort of say, well, that's being a woman in our world, and that's like part of it, right? And I actually have a poem about that I didn't pull up to read tonight, but I'll just share the line where one of our directors came by and said to my new male colleague at a holiday party, oh, you got yourself 3 ladies all to yourself. It's like 3 of us were senior trial attorneys. You got 3 ladies all to yourself. And then he said it again, right? And it's like, what? Like, we literally are at a federal civil rights agency. And that's just what is said as like, guy. It's like, how is a guy talk when we're right here, right? And and what I say in the poem is like dealing with smart, once handsome, sexist men is in every female's job description. If you're lucky, that is the extent of it.
I'd like to, can I follow on with that? Or Daisy, do you have more you want to say on that?
I just wanted to say that I was at Blue Cliff in August, and Sister Dong Neem did a Dharma talk, and in the Dharma talk, she spoke about how her niece, she was with her niece, and she sort of patted her on the bum, and her niece said, "Auntie, I'm not comfortable with that." And Sister Dong Neem really, you know, she said it made me, I hurt my feelings, but of course I was absolutely affirming to her that it was appropriate, and she should have said that. So we have a little bit of a Dharma talk on that from one of our beloved sisters. Thank you so much.
Yes, and I'm so glad that these kids are getting the message and putting it out there, and I hope they hang on to that.
Thank you for that great answer. And I want to just follow up on that, because something I feel like we run into in our community, and maybe this is all spiritual communities, but this, you know, a little bit of using the Dharma to justify some of it. We had a situation where someone touched somebody in the Sangha who was very physically challenged and had a lot of sensitivity around being touched. And she has spoken about it before, but maybe this person didn't know. And she touched her in a certain kind of way that upset her. She shared about it in Sangha and was crying. And then afterwards, the woman said to her, "I hope you get a little more equanimity." And so it's like, it's using the Dharma in this way of, you know, kind of like, you should just be nice and allow, and, you know, whatever. And so for me, that's a little bit of a challenging area. Like, how do we not do that? How do we stay strong for what, you know, is fair and just, but also be kind and compassionate? And, you know, anyway, that's a comment. I don't know if you have thoughts about that.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that comes to mind is intent and impact. And that's something I've heard in, you know, sort of diversity and other training about how we should comport ourselves. And some people focus only on intent and only on impact, but we really need to think about both. Whether or not I intended to hurt you, like, you're hurt and I need to deal with that. And on the other hand, if it's your first time doing a thing and it's really like outside of your zone, and if I have the wherewithal to explain why that's a problem, or a microaggression, or racial or sexist or whatever it is, like, having that exchange, I think, is important for people who are open to changing and growing. I also think there's some people who are, you know, abusive, and sort of coming up with how to make that judgment call in every situation, I think, is so important.
Yeah. Can I also, I just want to make a comment because I think it's important. My culture, Latinas, especially Mexicans, I think sometimes we don't know when not to touch or when not to kiss or when, and I think it's the same with Italians. Yes, Bea is doing signs. Yes. So it's important to, and French also, we all Latinas, no, it's really difficult for us because you feel like, that people is being called, that you are not welcome. And when you approach people, sometimes you feel like a rejection. So I just wanted to, I don't know if Bea can make a comment also. Yeah.
I would like to piggyback. Thank you so much for this talk. It's really informative, and I apologize if I'm cooking in the background, but I have to feed kids. So, but yeah, about what Adriana said, in the Italian culture also, and it just occurred to me, the other day I went to the gym, and there is an African man who manages the gym, and I'm very friendly, and I went up to him in his office. He's like, "Oh, nice to see you." And I touched his arm, like, "Nice to see you." And I realized he kind of tensed up. And so I thought to myself, my God, I hope I didn't, I felt awkward, but it really was connected to my culture.
Yes.
How I sometimes, the touch is part of like I care about someone. It's like, nice to see you. But I'm just very careful in the States, or I try to be, to the point that sometimes I feel I deny my own culture because I'm in a culture where I have to be completely always walking on eggshell because it could be misinterpreted. So, I mean, this is just an example, but I was teaching kids, and I was thinking to myself during Shavasana, you know, they're like maybe 10-year-old, 5th grade. So I wanted to go around and I said, well, if you don't want me to be near you, just raise your hand, or if you don't want the essential oil, but and it's good to give an option. They're kids.
Yes.
I feel like I almost self-censor myself because I'm afraid of like maybe doing something wrong. So I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, no, I think the whole idea of giving the option is really smart. And I think creating a culture where that is the norm, I think is helpful, so that it's not up to the person who's uncomfortable to always bring up the point. Rather, there's affirmative buy-in for, I do want the oil, I do want the assist, I do want this, or I do want your arm around me. And obviously this gets, you know, into the edge of dating violence and consent in that context, which can be complicated. But, you know, as a survivor-focused organization and as a women's rights group, we are always thinking about how can we make a world where women have freedom and dignity. And also because we care about racial justice and about how certain groups will be seen as perpetrators more than others, we need to make sure that whatever process is in place to investigate complaints, to address complaints, is done in an impartial manner, and that whatever response happens is proportionate. So if you just take workplace issues, sexual harassment ranges from asking someone on a date many times to a rape and everything in between. And so what the response is by an employer or whoever's in charge of that setting should be proportional. And you should give people a chance to learn and grow depending on the severity of the incident. And so even as a women's rights group, we are not in favor of some minor thing happens, fire someone, because that does not encourage reporting. Then people are saying, oh, then someone's going to lose their job and come after me. I'm not going to report it. You want to create a culture where people will report things and they will be addressed before they are very, very severe, so that you can actually have a workplace that's safe and dignified.
May I add something?
Sure. Go ahead, Magda, please.
Yeah, so I wanted to share my very recent experience. I was actually with, I've been reading and thinking about what gurus, you know, like you are doing meditation and you really, really trust a guru, right? Mm-hmm. And so I was recently in Japan at a yoga retreat, actually with my favorite yoga Japanese teacher. So I went there. I was very excited to be there, so we were staying at a hotel that was like pretty much Buddhist, and they brought a monk, a Zen monk, to teach us how to meditate. And so he was okay for most of the time until he took a stick. He had a stick in his hand, like a long stick, and he said, I'm going to show you, because I want you all to have your shoulders like very straight or whatever up, and and I'm going to show you what I do normally when I walk around every single person. And he hit this guy, one of the helpers, like it sounded awful, like awful. And the guy said, oh, it didn't hurt at all. And I had such a hard time with that. Understand, like I've worked with so many girls who have been, in so many difficult situations, and I just couldn't stand it. So I thought, I'm gonna say no. I'm gonna tell him you cannot touch me. But then I refused to see him, because they were all women. I refused to see him hit any woman in front of me. It was such a visceral reaction from me. I left. And then the next day, I was very surprised. They all loved it. all the women stayed. Well, there was only one girl who left, a young lady who's pretty tough, you know, and she left, and all the others, they loved it. And but you know, for me, it was incredibly clear that I was not going to allow a man touch me in such a way that even is symbolic, you know, of really, I mean, so I've been thinking a lot about having a guru, and how through thinking that these people have power over us sometimes, it could be very, very abusive. And it could replicate all the injustices of society just because you are so vulnerable, you actually trust this person, right? So I just wanted to share that. I haven't shared that with anyone else because it was very, and of course I left the place. I gave a recommendation about, if you ever decide, you know, you have to allow people to know what you're going to do ahead of time. And you have to allow people to have a choice as well from now on, you know, because I told that to my Japanese teacher, I told it to the other lady who went with us, and so forth. So, yeah, thank you.
That sounds really intense and sort of even beyond what you typically come into connection with. Oh.
Yeah,
that was, I only thought of my mother. My mother would have killed the man, you know, he would be like, don't you dare touch me, you know, like, and all this, I don't know. I was very surprised actually at myself, at even my own reaction, you know, and the next day when I asked the other ladies, and I was very, very, also very, very surprised at the reaction, you know. I don't know, not to be judgmental, I was just very surprised. And if this were an abusive person, really, I mean, think about all the potential of abuse, because the guy has more power, right? In a way, you know. But thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Goodness gracious.
Okay, I think last comment from Bea, and then we can move to the poetry section because we will run out of time if not.
Sure.
Thank you, Bea.
No, I just wanted to share one thing about but the Zen Japanese, and I totally understand what Magda said. Again, I go back to culture. In some culture, like in Japanese Zen, whatever, they do use sticks, and it can be, it's in that culture, maybe there's more tolerance for that. So how do we, but for us, it's not good. So it's very awkward and complicated how to interpret where the boundary is, especially in different cultures. By saying this, I don't demean Magda's experience at all. I totally get it. But it's still that fine line. And then I wanted to say something about the assist in yoga. I went to a trauma-informed yoga training, and someone said that rather than put the hand on the heart, one teacher was putting this like tokens of different colors. And if you don't want the assist, you put the token on your mat at a certain side with a color, so that it's even easier. It's like, I thought that was brilliant. It's like, I don't want to be touched. Stay away from my mat. Anyways, that's it.
Yeah, I think these are all good ways of giving people, sort of normalizing. People have different backgrounds and experiences, and all of those are valid, and we should respect them. So,
Sorry.
I think that's great. Okay. I'm just, while we're also having our discussion, I'm just adding some resources here. And then we can go to the poetry, if that's okay. All right. Okay. So, you think we're ready for the next stage?
Yes, please go ahead. We are ready.
Okay, wonderful. So I just wanted to end with this piece on poetry. And I started in high school writing poetry, and then in college I did peace studies and women's studies, and then did a women of color poetry group, and then we had a presentation and a book and everything. And so poetry has always been a way that I processed difficult questions and emotions and experiences. And in New York, I was part of SASI, South Asian Women's Creative Collective. We had literary events, and I ended up going on to a lot of different writing classes. and eventually learned about MFA programs and then did one part-time over 3 years and really loved that and enjoyed that and taught creative nonfiction at the college level and really think of creative work as part of our social justice work. And I love this intersection of art and activism. So I would even come from New York to attend the Split This Rock festival that would happen every 2 years. It's a 3 festival of workshops, poetry readings, events. And so I really hope that you all consider coming. It's March 26 to 28. It's here in DC. People come from around the country. So you can check that out on that link, that second link about the festival. But also, there are all kinds of events happening in DC through the same organization. There are free writing workshops that are twice a month on Wednesdays. There's an event called Sunday Kind of Love, which is on once a week on Sundays. So if you go to their website, splitthisrock.org, you can find the local events in DC. You can check out the information about the festival in March and save the date. And you can also sign up for their newsletter and you'll get one poem every Friday. That's a social justice themed poems. And this is just really an area that I'm so passionate about. I love especially youth poets, and Split This Rock is also the home for the DC Youth Slam. So this youth group goes and competes around the country with other youth poets. And so it's just incredibly inspiring and moving. And I love sort of bringing poetry to our work and encourage you all to sign up with Split This Rock for the weekly poem of the week that comes out every Friday. And those poems are collected on their database called the Quarry, where you can actually search by topic. So if you want a poem about women's rights or disability rights or racial justice, you can go to the Quarry, which is on Split This Rock, and find poems. You can filter poems by all different areas. So check it out and feed your soul. So that's what I have to say about Split This Rock, and really check out the festival. If you know of others who either are poets or appreciate poetry, please share this information with them. I found it just so moving to be involved, and I'm on the board because I would go to all their events after I moved to DC 5 years ago, and I literally was at so many of their events that they invited me to join the board. So I am so happy to be a champion for this organization. It's a social justice poetry organization. And if there are any questions about that organization, I can take them now. And if not, we can use, I think we have, how long do we have? Let's see how long we have, and then I can decide how many poems I can share.
We have 15 minutes left, so I think maybe,
Perfect.
yes, so we want always to close with a bell, but other than that, you can continue as long as you want. Thank you.
Great. All right, so I have, let's see, 4 of my poems and 4 other poems. So we'll see how many we get through. I mean, I typically pull out poems that have to do sort of more directly with women's rights and in this sort of setting. So I'm going to read a couple of those. And then I also pulled out 2 short poems that, to me, had a touch of sort of Buddhist philosophy, or reminded me of the kinds of themes that come to mind when I go to meditation or sort of doing that self-work. So I'm going to start with poems that are more related to the work that I do. The first one is called A Good Job for SK. My father gave me some good advice, she said, as we were chatting during the break, where we sat preparing her to take the witness stand. SK, with her head covering and beautiful daily wear salwar kameez. She continued, he told me if I study hard for my GED and get into college and do well, then I can get a good job. And in a good job, things like this don't happen to girls. I can get a job where men don't grab girls and try to kiss them in the basement of 99-cent stores. Upon hearing this, my eyes fell sad, and my mind was unsure whether or not to break the illusion, whether or not to tell her that men tried to grab and kiss women in all kinds of good jobs. Women in $1 million jobs speak to me about presidents of companies grabbing them and worse. I was unsure whether to explain that men in corporate positions think they are even more powerful than men who supervise 6 little stores. How to explain the complexity of human resources policies and the legal ramifications of not having any. Yes, maybe in corporate jobs they have pieces of paper explaining sexual harassment, but women still come here, talk about men grabbing them and kissing them, no matter how much money they make in their good jobs. But I told her simply, yes, in some offices it's better than other offices. In some offices it's better than in the stores. You should study hard for your GED and go to college and get a good job. We continued to prepare her testimony, how many times her manager said, I love you, how many times he said, you have to go out with me or I will fire you. She remembers that she told him, you know we are both Muslims. You know this is wrong in our culture. Please stop it. You know this is wrong. We went over her testimony about how many times he touched her shoulders, how many times he grabbed her hands, how many times he tried to grab her waist in the basement and tried to kiss her. We continued to prepare as she dreamt of her better job. And I never told her, I am sorry, darling, your lovely, supportive father is wrong. He is so wrong. Studying hard does not make the difference. Going to college cannot save you. A good job cannot protect you. These evil men who are usually protected by dead silence from our communities. But not this time. By the time this is over, these little stores will get their own piece of paper about sexual harassment and pay a monetary settlement to you. And Manager Man will get some training and some counseling. And we will carry forward a small hope that this will be his last victim, so that in any job, good or bad, more of us might be safe. That is a poem about Samira, who came to the federal agency where I worked probably 15 years ago. You know, before Me Too went viral, before Me Too, we had dozens and hundreds of cases of sex harassment. And typically as a federal agency, we would have brought quote unquote big class cases. But we basically made the pitch that this is an underserved community. This is very rare that someone would come forward with her dad's support, particularly having a harasser from the same community. And so we needed to bring this case. And so then this was written up in the sort of South Asian newspapers in New York and sort of had a ripple effect in that way. And so I think back so much in the last 2 years about all of the people who came forward before the cultural moment, and did not have, if we think people have so little support now, there's so many who came forward before even that. So that is dedicated to her. And the second poem I will read is called Lodge. And during sort of the Me Too moment, this was, I guess, my Me Too poem. And the context I'll give for it is, you know, having South Asian parents who were very super protective. You know, they wouldn't let me sleep over at others' houses, or, you know, you didn't want me to be around boys. And, you know, it just was a very protective atmosphere. And so I think the beginning of this poem gets at some of those myths of when and how sexual harassment or abuse happens. Often it's not a stranger. And on that note, unrelated to this poem, I do want to lift up a book called Love with Accountability that my friend Aisha Simmons it's an anthology about childhood sexual abuse survivors. And it's a very powerful book about people coming together and addressing abuse by people in their families and people they love, and how to deal with that, and how to deal with family members who can't deal with that. And it's a very, very powerful book, Love with Accountability. I think it's coming out October 1st because there's a lot of but you can pre-order it. I ordered it and I did a blurb for her from the Law Center. It's very powerful. So this, in terms of a trigger warning, this is not about childhood sexual abuse, but it is about a groping. So I want to say that before I start the poem. The poem is called Lodge. It was not dark. It was not night. I was not outside. I was not alone. I was not with strangers. There were women in the vicinity, a mother and 2 daughters preparing breakfast 2 rooms over in the next hotel suite. We were all recovering from your eldest daughter's extravagant wedding the night before. Your niece, my friend, went outside to make a telephone call. You came to say hello in the fullness of daylight, sat too close on the couch, and put your gigantic arms around me, and your palm came down fully onto my breast. Plain and clear, plain as day. I jumped and ran into another room. You went back to your hotel suite. Your wife and daughters continued to prepare breakfast. My friend came back and I told her because we were in Madras and I had no one else to tell. She said she cannot hear of such things. 10 minutes later, we all sat down together for breakfast. You complimented the intricate design on the sleeve of my dress. I sat wondering whether you did this kind of thing to your own daughters too, or only to their best friends who came over to play. Always expected to continue making nice. Like the time I came across the Native American teepees at the Brooklyn Museum. No description of how we might be working on making it right, like the notice I once saw in Vancouver. No notice about how museum items are often provenance unknown, that is to say, stolen. We are expected to simply appreciate the beauty of the acquired, to wonder at the intricacy of the beadwork of the terrorized. No mention of violation, nothing to speak of reparation. It's like I was sitting at breakfast, trying to enjoy that daughter's luminous newlywed smile, and the wife's incredible, even when improvised, home cooking. So that's from, I spent a year in India between college and law school, and, that was a piece that probably wrote a long time ago, but pulled up 2 years ago when Me Too went viral, because I just thought it was important to say out loud. And most women have countless experiences like this that you're expected to just breeze on by and keep it moving. Because what is your option in that kind of setting? And so poetry is a way for me to sort of bring these stories out. And the last poem on sort of the themes of connected to my work in that way is called Too Pretty. And this one is available on the Split This Rock website. Before I joined the board, they had actually published it. And it may be in a slightly different form, but it's something that's found on the internet. October on the subway, roses at my side, kids being loud. One skinny girl with a cap and a pretty smile gives me her seat and takes this chance to sit on her friend's lap. I read the paper, I look over at these girls, so free and easy, they are laughing, laughing. I look at the pink, pink roses and how I say I'm not a romantic, but this whole roses thing is going to ruin my reputation against romance. I watch the girls, I watch the skinny girl in boys' clothes and pretty smile flirt with all the other girls. So free and easy, they are laughing, laughing. And the man next to me, he is also watching, watching. The man next to me leans over to me and says, hey, miss, that's too pretty to be a boy, right? as if somehow that thought disgusts him, and he wants some agreement about this disgust. And I am just relieved that he knows I'm a miss and not a pretty boy. So I just shrug and I say nothing, because it is 1997 and I am afraid. Afraid to say, what does a she look like? What does a boy look like? What does too pretty look like? And what is your problem exactly? I don't know whether his disgust is that he thinks girls who look like boys should be beat up or boys who look like girls should be beat up, because we know they both are. I only know I was relieved he did not know my pink roses were for a girl, and I have this safety of passing. And I think to myself, you girls sitting there laughing, sitting there on your 6th grade girlfriend's lap, so free and easy, laughing. Be safe, pretty girls. Be safe, handsome boys. So that is, those are 3 poems that I sort of are on theme. Thank you for your note, Adriana, about the issues we talked about. These other 2, I don't know that I've ever read them or shared them. I pulled them out. They're pretty short. I think because I was listening to a Dharma Talk on the way home, just a little snippet about how there's always something wrong and you're like waiting to get to that moment where like everything is okay, and it's as soon as I move or as soon as my daughter starts in this new school or like whatever the thing is, there's always a thing. And that's, I think, what I was thinking about with these 2 poems, and they're short poems, and I don't think I've ever shared them. One has a long title. It says, practice raking leaves or sweeping to remind oneself of the feeling of engaging in work that knows no end. I'll read the title again. Practice raking leaves or sweeping to remind oneself of the feeling of engaging in work that knows no end. From a list of Buddhist tips regarding maintaining a mindful home. This, okay, and I also have a little sort of epigraph here that says, in the tradition of freedom is not once. That is a professor of mine, Barbara Caruso's baccalaureate address she gave in 1991, which is available at a link that I can share. That speech was so beautiful. It was about how when she was a child and she shoveled snow, and she just had to keep going. And she was like, why are we doing this? It's just going to keep falling, and having her dad say, like, you got to do it. It's like, this is the only way. And it was a metaphor for activism. And the title of her poem was Freedom is Not Once. This is a short poem about when I tried to live in my spouse's house that she grew up in. It was a disaster and I left, but this is the poem about it. We're still together. I just could not live in that house. It took 3 months to replace the broken doorknob. Every time I entered the house, it required struggle. Every departure, a fight for closure. Purchasing a new doorknob took minutes. Installing it, just half of one weekday evening. The solid feel of the newly installed doorknob, some kind of salvation. With every entrance calm, with every exit, the relief of normalcy. In this home float 3 ghosts and countless broken doorknobs. With each small repair, an acknowledgement of what can be fixed. With each remained brokenness, a despair that knows no end. The pleasant weight of it in my hand, the new doorknob, the strong click of a lock that fits, the sure sound, unhesitating in one's hands. I want to hug the front door and say thank you for waiting with your patient brokenness for all of these months. And early the next morning, we learned that 2 kitchen cabinets fell right off the basement tenant's kitchen walls. By the time she awoke, cans of tomato soup, corn, and beans lay scattered about the kitchen floor. And the second one, sort of on that theme, and I don't know that I've ever shared this, but when I did my MFA over the course of 3 years, the Masters of Fine Arts in Creative Writing, I was also going through the adoption process. And so my daughter was 2 when she was adopted, and she came in the middle of the course of study. And this was actually the title poem of that thesis for that MFA program. And the title is courtesy of my friend Pia. It's called 20 Years of Coats. Light blue coat from Angela, too baggy. Pink coat from Mira, still stained after 2 trips to the laundromat. It is the first cold day and I fumble and dress my toddler in make-do brown fleece and pink butterfly vest. Kneeling at her preschool cubby, I see for the first time her cubby mate's winter coat. Storybook gray-purple wool with light gray lining and silver, intricately designed buttons. All my years of brown immigrant longing stirred. Wishes first for Nikes, then Izods, then new cars on 16th birthdays. And now the desires simply shift to commute-friendly renovated homes in Park Slope, 3 bedrooms by the promenade in Brooklyn Heights. Crouched inches from that wool, I loudly unzip my kid's bright pink vest. Say nothing out loud, but my gaze shifts again to Sydney's coat. Relieved when I notice a bit of fraying at the edge of one of her sleeves. Never cared about any Manhattan mother's Gucci purse or high heels. But this time I walk away and purchase a size 3, stainless and fitted at the waist, knee-length navy blue coat. As my longings and I face the first cold day of a never-ending season.
That's lovely. That's lovely, Sunii. Wow, wow. We could just listen to you all night, I think. But
oh, very kind.
It's beautiful. It's so
Beautiful.
lovely. I mean, wow. Thank you for the generosity of sharing those with us. I think
Yes.
everybody here is just mesmerized.
Yes, and coach. Yes, so beautiful, everything.
Oh, very, very kind. Thank you. I really I'm so happy to get a chance to share.
We love it. I think we're going to finish with a bell so that people who need to go, we can go.
Yeah.
And we just want to thank you so much. And if after the bell, if people want to, sorry, there's a helicopter going by. After the bell, if people want to stay on and just say goodbye and thank you, we can do that after the bell.
Sounds good.
So from this time that we've had together, may all of us on this call and all beings everywhere be free and live with ease and safety and free from suffering and the root causes of suffering.